if you borrow $250,000, then every single day that you aren't selling that home, it's $70 in interest. Plus you have taxes, insurance, break-ins, things like that happen on vacant homes. We know that. And so the timeline matters because you don't account that every day is almost $100. And so each day delay, nothing else is changing except your profit. And you have to understand that time is of the essence when doing these rehabs. Hey there, and welcome back to the Pursuit of Property podcast. I'm sitting here with my friend, Cade Barrett. Cade, how is your Tuesday shaping up for you?
Dude, it is going good. I am excited to be bringing and continuing our series with today's episode. Today being part 3 of, we were just discussing this morning what I think is going to be a 4-part mini series that we've been building on so far. I'm excited to dive into today's convo, and I'm super excited with these last 2 episodes of the mini series to see if we can bring on maybe a couple guests to back up some of the things we're talking about, to bring extra insights and value that way. So I think we've got a great next couple weeks of the pod planned out. I'm pumped.
Yeah, I mean, a great episode to refer back to when talking specifically about the operation side of a flip would be going back and listening to our podcast with Casey, our contractor.
Yeah.
Casey's got a lot of experience. He's guided us a lot on how we handle this process. So if you are looking for a little supplemental engagement and just opportunity to learn, Casey would be a great episode to listen to.
Yeah. So let's kick it off. Today, we're continuing our convo on the building blocks of our business. Part 1, we talked about finding leads, how to convert prospects into leads, and the whole process that goes into marketing, right? Part 2, we focused on the sales and acquisitions process of how to handle and funnel a lead through that sales process, all the way up until the point of signing a contract.
Inked contract.
Boom. And today, we're going to be talking about the point, taking... when you have that signed contract, opening escrow, and then we're going to wrap up with all the way until you sell your project on the back end, whether that be you're selling a completed flip or a completed disposition with a wholesale. So we're going to go through that process today.
Right.
All right. So at this point, you now have a signed contract. Congratulations. You've killed the appointment. You now have this, and now you're sitting there going, what's next? Now, you need to go take that contract and go open escrow. For those of you who are looking into more insight on, even the escrow process, everything that goes in on the back end, we had some kick-ass escrow officers on the podcast a couple times. Mm-hmm. One episode was with the 2 of them, Christy Kutka and Love Baines. That was way back when we were in our old office. And then we actually had Love back on
more recently.
Yeah, more recently. So go check out those 2 episodes. The important thing here with both of those ladies over at Chicago Title and just an escrow company in general, when we're talking about this new contract that we have, whether it's going to be a flip, whether it's going to be a wholesale, whether it's going to be a wholetail, the most important thing is to work with an investor-friendly title company. And that's where relationships come into play, networking comes into play. We just shouted out 2 amazing escrow officers who, again, are at Chicago Title here in Fresno, who do an amazing job. Dana Bustamante handles a lot of the escrows for our team here at Pinnacle as well. Another really great investor-friendly escrow officer.
Also at Chicago Title.
Also at Chicago Title, that's right. So taking that contract and going to open escrow with an investor-friendly escrow officer. That is key.
Yeah, I think the biggest step here is once you have a signed contract, don't wait. Open escrow with a pre-decided escrow officer, introducing them to the seller and requesting a preliminary title report, right? That preliminary title report is the biggest hurdle that you're going to have to get through in most transactions because it's going to uncover unknown unknowns, right?
Yeah, and I was going to ask some people, and I want to get your opinion so we can give our listeners and viewers the right advice. The topic of an EMD.
Earnest money deposit.
Earnest money deposit, essentially called the good faith deposit, right? So when you have a contract that both parties agree to and is signed, typically you as the buyer are then required to go and deposit this good faith deposit money into escrow as a sign of good faith and to really solidify the contract.
That is the last thing required to have a fully executed contract is a deposited earnest money deposit.
Now, I even know some people in our investor community who don't go and submit the EMD. It's kind of just on there for, honestly for shits and giggles, but really, and some people like to brush over this part specifically about an EMD, but you made a really great point is that you do not even have a fully executed contract until that EMD has been put in at escrow. So typically that amount's already on the contract. Like Scott said, when you go and you've got your predetermined escrow officer, when you go, you take that signed contract, you open escrow. It is a good best practice to then either take a check for your earnest money deposit, wire your earnest money deposit on the spot, get that money in as soon as possible so that there can be no other hiccups with the seller wanting to back out, take another offer, and then, this whirlwind just gets, down a rabbit hole.
Right. So right away, follow the contract, put in your earnest money deposit, get the preliminary title report that's pulled by the title company. And the purpose of that is to determine, one, that ownership is there, right? Especially if you're dealing with probate or inheritance, things of that sort. It's important to verify that the person who claimed to be the owner is the lawful owner, right? The other thing it looks for is going to be delinquent taxes, liens, mortgages, encumbrances. There's a plethora of things, right? But the main point is to determine if there's any debt on the home. When you inherit the home, you want it to have zero debt except whatever money you paid for it, right?
And this is a question a lot of sellers have too, going into the escrow process, that you as a newer investor need to be able to verbalize to them, right? With the help of the escrow company, right? If they do have any remaining mortgage balance, oftentimes the seller, who is not familiar with the sale or, may not have sold a property in a long time, is how that's going to get paid off, right? And like you said, any other remaining items, delinquent taxes, any other liens. Typically, those small items are also taken out of the seller's proceeds. Typically, sometimes there's abnormal situations where you may
agree to something else.
Exactly. But you can relay the information to the seller that, hey, escrow is the neutral third party that handles and kind of facilitates our transaction. All of the money goes through escrow and they handle paying off the existing mortgage, paying off any existing delinquent taxes, liens, etc., and then getting you, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the remaining net amount to your pocket, whether that's via check or bank deposit. Escrow is the thing that is going to be facilitating that for you. So that's always a good thing to be able to communicate to the seller as well.
Right. And there are things that could pop up on a prelim because they're going to look into the person that's selling the home. So there could be federal or state tax liens. There could be child support payments that are delinquent. There could be a plethora of items, right? The whole purpose of looking at the preliminary title report is to identify that you're inheriting the home with no debt, no encumbrances that are unknown. At that point, we're going to fast forward. You fund the deal, whether that's through private money, hard money, or cash, and you can close on it. But there's a step that we missed, and this is probably one that is most often missed by new investors, is determining your exit strategy, right? Just because a home makes sense as a flip doesn't mean you have to flip it. Now, if you're very good at negotiating, you've got a good deal, there's a couple options you can go. There's potentially a route of wholesaling the transaction. That would mean you're identifying another investor who's going to pay for more than what you offered to the homeowner, and you're going to take the difference, right? You're assigning your interest in the contract for a fee, right? You're not flipping the house, you're flipping the paper. There's wholetailing, where at this point, if you're talking to a contractor, you have to determine, am I going to go all the way, or am I just going to have my contractor clean it up a little bit? And then lastly is going through and getting your contractor to get a full inclusive bid for the property so that you know, okay, how much money will I need to complete this project? We don't recommend that you buy a home without getting an idea of what that really is going to look like. Your initial estimate may be off, and you want to know that before you borrow money or before you close on the deal.
100%. So we've got these three kind of primary exit strategies. Let's start with you're analyzing your deal, you're looking at things, how the cards fell, and you're like, okay, I want to wholesale this deal. You are now at a point in the escrow process. Hey, maybe prelim came back, everything's checking out. Really, everything's looking good. And at this point, you've decided, hey, I need to wholesale the property. I know you handle a lot of dispositions, which is what we call kind of this back half of a wholesale deal, this kind of process.
Disposition is just any form of exiting a deal.
And for a wholesale deal, what does that dispo process look like?
It needs to be as simple as possible, right? Wholesaling is definitely frowned upon by realtors because they believe that you're doing a realtor's job and you're not. You as a wholesaler, your job is to negotiate a deal on a home with a homeowner and then identify a reputable investor who can close on it, facilitate the promises you made to the seller, and also pay you a profit for the work that you've done, right? This is where the importance of taking notes through your whole sales process comes back up. Because if you're going to wholesale, I always recommend that you have a small group, maybe 5 people that you know and trust can perform if they give you their word, right? You want experienced, capable investors. And how that looks is you compile a set of data about what you know about the property, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Anything that you know you need to disclose, that investor is trusting you to give them the information that they would have known had they talked to the seller. The second part to it is providing them photos and a price, right? And so when you're wholesaling a property, the main thing to know is that you still have to budget for them to make money. Now, it's not your job to make sure that they make money, but when pricing it, you need to think to yourself, what repairs does the investor have to make? What fees and costs do they have to incur to do the deal? And then what would be a reasonable profit margin for that investor? At that point, that's how you determine your sales price. So maybe you got a deal locked up for $100,000, but you feel pretty confident that Cade could buy this for $130 and still make money. Well, then great. You reach out to Cade. You say, hey, Cade, here's the address. Here's the price of $130,000. Here's everything I know about the project. And here are the photos to the home, right? At that point, you're going to handle a conversation with them. And assuming that you're agreeable, all you have to do at that point is sign an assignment contract and introduce them to the escrow officer in a new email thread saying, hey, I will be assigning the contract to Cade Barrett. Here's his information. And Cade can then at that point take over.
Another point to reiterate again is this is where having an investor-friendly escrow or title company comes in handy, because even, some title companies just flat out won't even handle, or even escrow officers in particular won't even handle wholesale or assignment transactions. So again, if you guys are local in this area, all of the escrow officers we named are investor.
Christy does not.
Oh, okay. Now does not. Okay. So we've got at least those two that we can recommend and make to you.
That would be Loveneat Baines at Chicago Title and Dana Bustamante at Chicago Title. They both will do assignment contracts.
Boom. Now, when we're talking about assignments as well, I mean, we kind of outlined that process, right? Having that core group of, maybe up to 5 people that can perform, right? But if you're a newer investor, maybe you've never even assigned a deal before, this is your first deal, you don't really want to flip it, you kind of want to generate that quick cash with a wholesale. Again, this is where you kind of have a couple options. And one is, hopefully up until this point, you have been networking. You've been going to local meetups. You've been talking to people who are doing what you want to be doing and are further along, right? To where you may have been introduced to people who are flipping and actively looking for deals, and you can bring that deal to them to see if it makes sense, right? But if you're in a spot where, hey, maybe you have exhausted a couple of those options, and at the end of the day, we sound like a broken record, but it's another example of you'd rather have a piece of a watermelon than an entire grape. And if you're not even able to assign the deal on your own, it's a hell of a lot better having something than absolutely nothing, right? So there is nothing wrong with going and asking for help or joint venturing with somebody, or another investor that can help you dispo that deal in order to, at least maximize the amount of profits you're able to make.
Right. So we've kind of exhausted the wholesale option, right? That you do that. That means at the end of the initial escrow, you get paid and you're done.
Yep.
There's two other routes to getting paid in an investing world, at least the two that we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
There's wholetailing and flipping. So if you've concluded you don't have it at a price that you can sell it as it stands to another investor for a profit that you're happy with, then you're looking at buying the home. And now you just have to decide, how far do I take that flip, right? Wholetailing would be on the light end, typically just a clean out or sometimes nothing at all. And it's going to be a shorter timeline, right? So if the home's in pretty decent shape, you got it at a good price, but the seller for some reason or another didn't want to list it, they didn't want to deal with realtors, and you see that you can turn around and list it on the open market, that's probably the easiest way after wholesaling. And then lastly, it's going the full way with the project, hiring a contractor, paying out schedules, getting it remodeled, listing it and selling it. So you have to make a decision there.
100%. In an ideal world, right, during this escrow period, if you you decide, not really leaning wholesale, really looking towards wholesale or flip, right? Like you said, a big determining factor there is the actual condition of the property. Is it clean enough for traditional financing if you were to turn around and put it on the open market, right? If yes, at least in our local market here in the Central Valley, wholetails do really, really well, especially for our team. We've done really well with capitalizing on wholetails. But in terms of a flip, ideally in this escrow process, you are able to, one, if it's vacant, two, if it's occupied but will be vacant, when you go to flip it, is coordinating it with the sellers to get your contractor over there in order to get the bid process started while you are in escrow.
And begin the scheduling process of getting your contractor on the books so that right when you close, you can start work on it.
That is the most important, one of the most important things to get dialed in during this escrow period, right? Because a lot of times, especially with a flip, when there's a lot of moving pieces, if there's a lot of dead time, right, where you have not been able to kind of overlay and schedule these things back to back to back, and then every day is money out of your pocket, right? So a good example is actually one that we're going through right now is we have a tent on there for pest fumigation, right? And we have it scheduled that as soon as that tent comes down, our home inspector and our cleaners are going out the next day, right? So if we don't get that schedule and those people on the books quick enough, we could have a longer stretch delay in between there that could even stretch out to a week, 2 weeks, to where that's just money out of your pocket while you're waiting for the next person to come in and take care of business.
Yeah, I apologize. I pulled out my phone because I wanted to do quick math for an example of why this is important. If you borrow $250,000, then every single day that you aren't selling that home, it's $70 in interest. Plus you have taxes, insurance, break-ins, things like that happen on vacant homes. We know that. And so the timeline matters because you don't account that every day is almost $100. And so each day delay, nothing else is changing except your profit. And you have to understand that time is of the essence when doing these rehabs.
All right. So we're here. Let's say we're nearing the end of the escrow process on whether you have decided on wholesale or flip, right? You have, if it's for a flip, you have your contractor started, you have your close of escrow date, you have them scheduled shortly after to start on the project. If it's a wholesale, you have either your cleaners or your realtor scheduled the day after to go out and assess and get it ready and prepped for listing.
The other part to this is you have your insurance lined up. That's something a lot of people forget about is you have your property insurance set up and escrow has it. So if something happens, you're prepared.
100%. Typically, one of the most important things to start with right when escrow closes, if you are owning the property, whether in a wholesale or a flip, is to get, if it's your handyman, great. If it's your contractor, great. If it's you yourself, great. But one way or another, get the locks changed on your property, right? You don't know who may be out there with copies of the keys, right? You don't know how many people have owned the home before, lived in the home before, right? And especially if it's in a not so great area of town and maybe they might be old locks or old doorknobs, right? You just want to get new hardware, new keys, and a new lockbox onto the property so that everything's starting fresh. You've got a lockbox there for your contractors to use. You've got now the property is secured and you're not worrying about any loose ends or any floating keys around anywhere. But that being kind of that first important step that we usually schedule and do anytime we close on a flip, we send our guy out there to, 1, switch out the locks, and 2, put a new lockbox on there for the team who's now going to go in and start the rehab.
Yeah. I think thinking about the future, this would be a great time as well to take a before video. If you're somebody who's flipping homes, one of the best ways to demonstrate, that you are a legitimate flipper is to get content created, right? And so that could be you filming it with your own phone, telling people that you bought the property, or it could be paying a professional to come out and shoot it. But before you touch the house, getting an idea of what it looked like so that when it's done, you can post that and people can see kind of the work you're doing.
Absolutely. And that should happen if the property does have a lot of trash or a lot of things needing to be removed. It's always cool to have that before video shot while it's as is, right when you buy it, right? To see the biggest type of transformation. The other thing relating to property security is if the property is not in a great area of town, or 2, even if it's in a good or decent area of town and any of the windows are broken and there are access points into the property, if you are ordering new windows, those typically take, even right now, multiple weeks, right? Sometimes even over a month to get a brand new order of windows in and installed. Is just taking some sheets of plywood. Like we did a deal review, I don't know, a couple months ago on a project on Yale where we brought in and we literally our team put a crap ton of pieces of plywood all around the property, all the windows. 60. Holy crap, 60 pieces of plywood, right? So making sure property security first and foremost. If it's in a not great area of town, even if the windows are intact, we typically like to put those plywood on the windows. Or if it's in a great or decent or average area of town, but any access points, make sure to secure those.
That's it. And I think at this point, the biggest and most important part of the process is staying on top of your contractor, visiting the property weekly, and ensuring that the structure that you set up, the timeline and the payment schedule is being met. I think this is where a lot of people fall apart at the wheels, is they aren't staying on top of the project. And if this is your only deal or you only have a few, it's worth your time to go check on them and walk it, because it shows activity. It shows your contractor that you're paying attention. And as you're going through this flip, you'll get a better idea of how to budget for different issues.
And this may seem like common sense, but we say it because we've seen it happen, is another best practice, especially when you're handling, money and contractors and this whole process of flipping a house, right? Is you never pay the full amount of the bid to a contractor up front. If they say this project's going to take $90,000, this sounds so obvious, but we say it because we've seen it happen before, is you do not take that full $90,000 and give it to the contractor up front. You made an important point, is setting that we like to do weekly payment schedules based on, hey, what's supposed to get done this week? How much is that going to cost? And let's take it week by week and pay out on a weekly basis. It ensures that you are keeping tabs with your contractor, that the work they say is getting done, is going to get done, is in fact getting done. And 3, that they just can't take, especially if you're a new flipper or working with a new contractor, that person can't just take the $90,000 and walk off the project and now you're shit out of luck with all your rehab money.
Right. And it happens more often than you think. And so that's why we bring it back up. Now that you're nearing, though, towards the end of the project, there will have been hiccups, things that you have to deal with. And we can't predict all of those, but that's why you go and walk the project and you stay in constant contact with your contractor. Now that you're towards the end, there's a few best business practices. One would be contacting your realtor and starting to get an idea of what the fixed up value might be, so that when it's done, you don't have a delay there. Again, back to every day costing you $100. If your project gets complete and then it takes 3 or 4 days to get the listing up and live, That's $400. So instead, as you're approaching the end, start getting your realtor involved, getting an idea of what your go-to-market strategy looks like. The other thing that we have started implementing and that I would recommend is having a trusted home inspector do a home inspection. Because in our area, it's almost every sale is going to have a home inspection. The value of it is that assuming you've completed everything, it's going to be fairly clean and you can have buyers sign off on that on the initial offer. The security side of it is if something got overlooked and it was in the bid, your contractor can fix it before it goes to market. And, or if it was not in the bid, you can pay your contractor quickly to fix it so that you don't have that issue while you're in escrow.
Exactly. We like to use it essentially as kind of like a final punch list, right? Or in conjunction with our final punch list when a project is at completion and we need to go in there, take care of any, essentially like a blue tape session where, hey, if there's any odds and ends, if there's anything wrong before we go and get this officially listed, having that home inspection in hand is huge. And again, that's a couple $100 up front, but can save you money, time, and whatever else in the long run. And when you hit get into escrow on the sale side. The other thing on the topic of inspections that we forgot to mention is even back typically before rehab starts, a best practice we like to do and that our contractors like us to do is get a pest inspection even before the rehab starts. So we've closed on it. We then have a pest inspection done so that our contractors have that pest inspection in hand. If there's any wood rot, any fascia issues, stuff like that. Termites, while we are in rehab and while they're tearing everything out and doing things anyway, they are able to take care of most, if not all of those pest items in the rehab anyway. So they're able to knock those items out. And when escrow, again, when we're nearing, or not escrow, excuse me, when the project is nearing completion, being able to get that pest, clearance saying, hey, all these items are good to go. You're going into the listing with a clean pest report. You're going in with a home inspection with any last minute items that are taken care of. And you're prepped and ready to go to get the best price on market.
And your final payment to your contractor won't go out until the home inspection's done and it's reviewed and completed and all repairs are done. Once your contractor leaves, it's very hard to get them to come back, right? So don't pay that last amount until that home inspection's done and you verify that the entire scope of work has been complete, right? Talking about listing, the agent that you pick matters. So if it's out of area, pick an agent in the area, right? We see flippers all the time with listings that aren't on our MLS because they're from out of area. The mistake that's made is that it's not getting marketed to every buyer, right? Yeah. If you're flipping homes, you want it to go for top dollar. So pick an agent in the area of the home. For us, if it's in Porterville, our team doesn't list it. We legally could, but we are not Porterville-based agents. So we have an agent who's in Porterville every day. He lists those properties for us, right? Same with Bakersfield, same with Modesto, same with all these areas away from us. So if you get a deal and it's not in your immediate area, consider which agent is right because they're going to give you better insight and they're going to know more about that area.
100%.
The second part to it is, depending on the time of year, if it's in the fall or the winter, I always recommend that you price it a little bit less than what you think it's going to sell for. Only because if you're off, those winter months are going to drag out a lot longer. In the summer, there's so much activity that maybe pricing it a little more than you expect is fine because there's going to be people making offers pretty much no matter what. So depending on the timeline, listen to your realtor on the pricing strategy. Again, holding time is one of the things that can eat all of your profit. And the way that you play that game is important. So listen to your realtor. And like I just said, in the winter and fall, typically price it a little less than you expect it to sell for. And in the summer and spring, price it maybe a little more.
100%. And I think also when we're on the topic of listing, right? Typically, what also is a big part of listings that you as the seller need to not only fill out, but also provide to the buyer are the disclosures. Now, we are not legal professionals. We are not giving legal advice. Just make sure in those disclosures, you do need to disclose what work was done on the property, right? If you guys did a rehab, you need to explain the extent and disclose that a rehab was done. So That's going to be a brief little tidbit on disclosures again. And also your agent is not going to be able to give you direct legal advice on how to fill out those disclosures, but just make sure you're disclosing what was done on the property.
Right. And moving towards accepting an offer, one of the best practices here is to have a P&L for each project, right? A profit and loss that's tracking what we paid for the project, what our closing costs were to buy it, how much we've paid in the rehab, how much our holding costs are up to that day, or potentially you can budget all the way through the estimated escrow that they're offering, and then make a financially based decision on which offer to take. A lot of sellers get very emotional when selling and they can become offended or they could feel a certain way. As an investor, your job is to be analytical and to be going off of what makes monetary sense, right? If you don't have a P&L and you don't track your spending and you don't know how much you're into the project, how could you possibly make a good decision on how much to sell it for, right? You may get an offer 10 grand under asking, but it still makes you $40,000. Well, if that's the offer you got, would you rather make the $40,000 now, or would you rather potentially wait 40 days, which is another, what is that, $4,000 just to get the same offer? Well, each day that goes by is $100. So time matters, right? That first offer, in my experience, is usually the best. And the longer you sit on market, the more money you're losing in holding costs. And you need to keep track of that as you're reviewing offers.
Well, and you talking about kind of this financial sense, right? It made a light bulb pop into my head too. An important point to note, again, kind of back in the rehab process, is an important thing to note is do not get emotionally attached to the project. And that can look and feel like a couple different things. More often than not, in a mistake that we see newer investors and even some seasoned investors do sometimes is over rehabbing the property, right? Yeah. You are going in, you're getting emotionally involved. You want to put in the nicest stuff. You're designing it the way you would want it if you were living in it. And you are leaving thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on the table if you are going in, getting emotionally attached and putting in the fixtures and, you know, the nicest countertops and everything you would want if you were living in there. But it's important to note, you are not living in there. You are an investor. You're not going to put $1 million finishes in a $400,000 house, right?
Yeah.
So you need to be conscious of what type of rehab you're doing and what price point you're going to be in. And again, having that trusted agent to kind of help guide you through, hey, here's what people in this price point expect in terms of finishes or in terms of materials and stuff like that. So make sure you are educated on what that looks like and do not get emotionally involved with the project because it's going to hurt your net when you go and accept an offer and close on the sale end.
On the flip side too, outside of over improving, don't try to do it yourself all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we see people all the time who lose more in hold time than they saved in doing the work themselves. And very often they're doing it worse than what a professional would do it, how the professional would do it, right? There are certain things that you can do that aren't super hard. That's great. Take advantage of that if you want to. But you're going to get to the point where you realize that your time is going to cost you more than what the savings you're making, right? If a guy's going to charge you $2,000 to paint a house and you say, well, I can paint it for $500, but he can do it in 2 days and it's going to take you 2.5 weeks. Well, that right there is going to eat up a big chunk of the savings that you just made. And it's going to put everybody else back, right? Because until the painting's done, other things aren't going to get done. So I just want you to also think about, this is a business. Does the owner of a restaurant cook all the food, make all the drinks? Because that would be cheaper than paying an employee. You have to understand that sometimes paying the person who can do it correctly and can do it quickly is better than you trying to save a buck doing it yourself.
And that's the key piece, doing it correctly and not cutting corners, because we all know that flippers do get a bad rap because, or even like people who own rental properties too, who just go in and slap a coat of paint on something and consider it good, right? That's where a lot of the bad rap for flippers comes from. That's where we give the advice and also take pride on the projects that we're working on to make sure we are delivering a quality product. We're not cutting corners. We're not trying to put, the cheapest amount of stuff in or trying to do it all ourselves, right? We want quality professional work and materials in the project so that when the next homeowner or family comes in to live there, they're proud of the product that they have just purchased.
Right. And so moving into the escrow for the sale phase, right? The biggest thing here is having the realtor who can actually stay on top of the lender, stay on top of the other agent and the buyer, right? It's important as a flipper to keep stuff on timeline. We very often, we get into escrow as we're selling it and we get a little lazy. We're like, oh, this is great, but things fall apart, right? And so again, the agent you hire matters. Making sure that timelines are being held, making sure that requests for repairs are getting negotiated, making sure appraisals are making value, or if not, they're getting handled. That all falls back on you and your realtor, right? And at that point, once you've gotten through those hurdles, then you can start to relax.
And at that point, you're basically close to the end of the finish line, clear to close, right? Now, some of the questions that might be swirling in your head are, okay, now I've got a pretty good idea of what I'm going to walk away with the project from, what my net profit's going to be. If it's now looking at it going, okay, what am I going to do with all this money? Where do I put this money? What should I be doing with this money? What should I be looking back on and learning from this project as I go and now have a deal under my belt to now go and want to close more deals? All of this kind of back end stuff after a deal closes that happens behind the scenes is what we're going to cover in our final part of the building blocks of your business. So all really important questions, all really important data to collect and to process and to make decisions moving forward to get more deals.
That's it. And I think the biggest thing to take away from the operation side of the business is understanding that it's a detail-based portion of the business. Making sure that you are tracking, making sure that you are following through on commitments you make, you're following up with your contractor. The big one is paying your contractor when you said you would, assuming they do the work they said they would do. These are all important parts to creating a sustainable business. You don't want to have a new contractor every project. And so creating relationships with agents you trust, with contractors you trust, with inspectors you trust, with title officers that you trust. Having this team around you is what will make this easier for you and create some level of stability and predictability in your business.
It's a flashy business. It looks easier said than done, right? But having all of these trusted professionals, all of these moving pieces on the back end dialed in and set up for success is what is really going to take you from, hey, doing one deal or doing a couple deals to really making a business out of being a real estate investor and having that continuous flow of deals coming in and also going out.
Even more than that, I honestly think the stuff that happens after the money hits your bank account and you've done the deal and that $30,000, $40,000 hits your bank, that's, I think, where the business really turns on. I think what you do with that money matters almost as much, if not more, than what you did to get the money, right?
100%.
We've seen a lot of people do one deal and they're one and done kind of investors, and that's fine. It's not for everybody, but if you want to actually capitalize on any kind of momentum, right? This is when you need to really let go of those limiting beliefs that are holding you back from pulling the trigger on paying for the things to make your life better and easier. And if you aren't, you're just going to end up draining that account. I mean, we've done it ourselves. We've made big chunks of money and spent it as fast as we made it. What you do after you get that money is just as important. And I think people really need to pay attention to that next podcast.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you for tuning in. I think I'm going to throw out a quick teaser. We are actually having some really great guests lined up, and there is going to be the biggest real estate event of the year in mid-April. It's going to be on April 20th.
April 19th and 20th.
19th, 20th. Yes, that weekend. We're going to have some great guests lined up for the pod. We're actually flying in somebody that you met over at Investor Fuel earlier this year.
Yeah.
And we have him lined up to come out on the pod in April. We have some great content coming out and some great guests coming on in the weeks before that, guys. But just wanted to throw that teaser out there. We have a lot of value coming. We're excited to continue bringing it to you. And if you guys are not signed up for that event, we're both signed up. We've got our tickets ready to go. That is going to be the biggest collaboration and networking event in the Central Valley probably this year. So sign up, go network, and we're looking forward to it, guys.
Yeah, you can find more information on Deal Champs. I think it's dealchamps.com. Or if you go in the Central California Real Estate Investor Meetup group on Facebook, that's a mouthful. But if you go on there, it's going to be hosted at Table Mountain. It's a huge event. Like you said, I don't think it's biggest this year. I think it's biggest that we've seen
In the Central Valley
ever. And I think they're flying in over a dozen speakers. I know every major investor I know is planning on being there. And I think if you are at a point where you haven't done a deal or you've done a couple of deals, this is going to be an eye-opening moment for you. I think tickets start around $100 or something like that. So it's for 2 days. It's really not a huge fee. And if you're not willing to invest the $100 into yourself, you're definitely not going to have what it takes to invest the hundreds of thousands into a beater property, right? So please, sign up, go to that. We'll be there. And it is a huge opportunity, and there's going to be a lot of value being given there.
100%. All right, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next week back on the Pursuit of Property podcast.